Думаешь, я этого не знаю? Я боюсь, мировым патриархатом, сидя в двухкомнатной квартирке, это первое невозможно. И второе ненормально. И я хочу кого-то ранить. Как меня изранили.
To sew the Morgan dress, choose dress weight fabrics with the following properties. Medium weight, opaque, tightly woven, structured, soft. They can be either non-stretch or have little stretch. The fiber content can be 100% linen or linen blended with synthetics. For example, linen and polyester. Cotton fabric will also be suitable for this dress. For example, sateen. Its right side is shiny, while the wrong side is matte. Sateen is medium weight, low stretch, and opaque. The other option is cotton poplin. It is tightly woven, opaque, nice to the touch, and a little stretchy. You can also opt for shirting fabric if it has the properties we mentioned earlier. It should be opaque, structured, low stretch or non-stretch, pleasant to the touch. Consider denim, it is suitable for the dress, too. It has all the required properties. To sew a more light and fluid version of the dress, choose dress weight viscose. We have chosen 100% linen. We will be reinforcing the pieces with woven interfacing. The interfacing weight is about 40 to 60 grams per square meter. The edges will be fused with bias cut fusible stay tape. The tape has reinforcement stitches in the middle. The tape is 1.5 centimeters wide. You will need 1 spool of thread for construction and 4 spools for overlocking the edges. If you are planning to sew the dress without an overlocker, you will need lightweight cotton batiste to make bias binding. To sew a toile, you will need calico. It should be light colored, with no print. To sew this dress, you will need a sewing machine. Use an all-purpose presser foot or a transparent one. For edge stitching, you will need a stitch in the ditch foot. If you don't have one, use an all-purpose foot for all kinds of seams. You will need a number 80 needle if you're sewing with linen. Number 90 or number 100 if you're sewing with denim, or number 70 if you're using viscose. To finish the seam allowances, you will need an overlocker. If you're going to bind the seam allowances, we recommend using a bias tape maker to accelerate the process. We will be using a 12 mm maker. You will also need an ironing board, a steam iron or an industrial steam generator iron, a tailor's board, which will come in handy when pressing the seam allowances open, a tailor's ham, and a tailor's clapper. In this lesson, you will learn how to choose the right size and height group for the Morgan dress. To choose the right size, you will need to take your body measurements properly and compare them to the standard ones. Take the following measurements: bust circumference, waist circumference, and hip circumference. You will need to know your exact height and measure the length of your back and front to the waist. On this lesson's page, you will find a size chart. You need to compare your measurements to those given in the size chart and choose the size. Let's look at the example. In the size chart, you will find measurements for each of the 4 height groups. Evaluate which height group will suit you best. The example height we're looking at is 165 centimeters. It fits into the second height group. Next, choose the size. When making a dress, the main measurement you need is the bust circumference. Compare it to the size chart. In the example, the bust is 91 centimeters. In the chart for the second height group, we need to find a measurement closest to the one we have. As you can see, a 92 centimeter bust corresponds to size 40. This measurement is the closest to the one we have. However, we can't settle on the size until we're sure about the height group. The dress features a waist seam, so we need to know the front and back length measurements to make sure it sits exactly at the waist. Therefore, we need to compare the said measurements to the size chart. Let's refer to the size 40 column and find the front length and back length measurements. The standard back length is 41.4 centimeters, while the example number is 40.5 centimeters. Turns out, the standard measurement is larger. The same applies to the front length. The example number is smaller. In this case, we need to reconsider our height group choice. Let's take a look at the first height group chart. Here we see that this group's measurements are closer to the ones we have. Therefore, we are to choose the first height group. Take a look at the waist and hip measurements of the chosen size. We have a 74 centimeter waist. The standard one in the chart is 72 centimeters. The standard hip measurement for this size is 98 centimeters. We have 101 centimeters. Turns out, our waist measurement is 2 centimeters larger than the standard one, and the hips are 3 centimeters larger. This means the dress may be tight around the waist and hips. To fix this, we will need to increase the pattern at the waist and hips by the required amount. We can simply add this missing volume to the side seams. The dress has 2 side seams, so we can just evenly add the needed width to every side seam allowance. If we divide 2 centimeters needed at the waist by 2, we will get 1 centimeter for each side seam. This means we need to add 0.5 centimeters, just under 1/4, to each seam allowance of the front and back. This way, we'll add volume to the waist. Then we divide 3 centimeters for the hips by 2 and get 1.5 centimeters for each side seam. This results in 0.75 centimeters for each side seam allowance of the front and back. Note that you can add a maximum of 2 centimeters to each side seam allowance. This means you can add only up to 8 centimeters along the side seams. Let's make all the needed changes to the pattern pieces. We've cut out the front and back bodice pieces as well as the front and back skirt pieces. I'm going to use only the left front bodice piece to demonstrate the process, because the right front bodice piece is practically the same except for the front edge shape. Note that you will need to make the same changes to the right front bodice piece afterwards. Let's begin with altering the back bodice. Add 0.5 centimeters to the waistline. Then add a 1 centimeter seam allowance. Add the same amount to the waistline on the back skirt piece so that the bodice and skirt pieces match. Add 0.5 centimeters and a 1 centimeter seam allowance. Redraw the side seam of the back bodice. Connect the waist seam allowance with the drawn side seam allowance. Now that the back bodice piece is altered, just cut along the marked lines when cutting out the piece. Do the same for the back skirt piece. In addition to the waist adjustment, we also need to add to the hip area. We need to add 0.75 centimeters to the hips. Round it up to 0.8 centimeters. Then add a 1 centimeter seam allowance. You may either add the same amount to the entire side seam below the hips, or taper the volume off and gradually combine the drawn side seam with the drafted one. This will create a tapered look. I'm going to combine the drawn and drafted side seam lines. Don't forget to add a 1 centimeter seam allowance. Redraw the side seam at the top of the skirt. Find the best curve to trace along. Alter the front bodice and skirt pieces the same way. Increase the waistline by 0.5 centimeters. And redraw the side seam. After you've made the adjustments, check whether the pattern pieces match well. You need to make sure that after stitching the side seam, the waist seam edges will merge into one smooth line. There should be no mismatches. Join the pattern pieces and secure them together with pins or tape. Fold the 1 centimeter seam allowance under. Join the pattern pieces along the side seam. And pin. Adjust the waist seam edge using a French curve ruler. Adjust the seam allowance outline as well. Before that, there was a dip at the junction point. We've adjusted the outline to smooth it out. Cut out the pieces. Remove the pins. The pattern pieces are ready. In the next case, we have the opposite situation. The hip and waist measurements are smaller than the standard ones. The hips are 4 centimeters smaller, while the waist is 7 centimeters smaller. Divide the excess amount by 2 for the side seams and then by 2 again, for each side seam allowance. The result is we have to reduce the pattern pieces by 1 centimeter at the hips, and by 1.75 centimeters at the waist. Measure 1.75 centimeters towards the inside of the piece to reduce it at the waist. Then measure 1 centimeter to the right to mark the side seam allowance. Redraw the side seam. Here's the result. Do the same for the front bodice piece. Measure 1.75 centimeters towards the inside of the front bodice piece and add a 1 centimeter seam allowance. Redraw the side seam. Here's the result. Cut along the marked lines, join the pieces along the side seam, and check if the waist seam edges merge smoothly. Let's see if the front and back bodice pieces match well at the side seam. Fold a 3 to 4 centimeters long section of the seam allowance under. Place the pieces together. Match the side seams and pin. If we don't smooth out the junction area, the edges will form a prominent corner. This needs to be fixed. Use a French curve ruler to redraw this section with a smooth line. We have to get rid of this corner. You will most likely end up with a line that looks neater than mine. Use a sharp pencil. I'm using a marker so that you can see the adjustments better. Cut along the marked line. Remove the pin only after cutting. Next, we need to adjust the skirt pieces. Measure 1 centimeter towards the inside of the piece at the hips, and add a 1 centimeter seam allowance. At the waist, measure 1.75 centimeters towards the inside as well. Connect the markings with smooth lines. You may either extend the marked lines to the bottom edge, drawing them parallel to the original ones and, therefore, tapering the skirt, or just gradually combine them with the original lines. I'm extending the marked lines. If the marked line is broken, smooth it out as you cut out the piece. Next, verify if the pieces match well along the side seam, as we did before. Pin and use a French curve ruler to smooth out the junction area. Now the waist seam edge is nice and even. Let's see what we can do if the pattern needs to be adjusted by more than 8 centimeters. For example, the difference is 10 centimeters. In this case, we're going to take in the volume not only at the side seam but at the front and back pleats too. If we have a 62 centimeter waist when the standard measurement is 72 centimeters, we will need to evenly reduce the pattern by 10 centimeters. This amount should be divided between 8 pleats, 4 at the front and 4 at the back, and 2 side seams. This means we will need to adjust each area by 1 centimeter. When you're making changes to the pleats on the bodice, note that the first pleat must match the dart on the skirt. You will also have to maintain the drafted distance between the pleats. Therefore, we are going to increase the pleat intake by moving its right leg farther. The left leg should remain as it is. Measure 1 centimeter from the right leg. The center line should move accordingly. Measure the distance between the legs. It is 4 centimeters. The center line should be right in the middle, at 2 centimeters from each leg. It will shift 5 millimeters to the right. Measure the drafted distance between the pleats. It is 3.5 centimeters. Measure this distance from the new right leg. we need to increase the original 3 cm wide pleat by 1 cm. Therefore, it should be 4 cm wide. The center line is 2 cm away from each leg. Extend the direction marking. On the front bodice piece, we have to maintain the distance between the center front line and the first pleat. The first pleat is 4.5 cm wide. If we increase it by 1 cm, we will get 5.5 cm. Draw the new center line at 2.75 cm from each leg. Measure the distance between the drafted pleats. It is 3.5 cm. Measure this distance from the drawn leg. Measure 5.5 cm to mark the needed pleat intake. Mark the center line at 2.75 cm from each pleat leg. Next, adjust the side seam by 1 cm as well. Adjust the side seam on the back bodice piece. Fold the pleats and join the front and back bodice pieces along the side seam to check if they match. In order to fold the pleats, trace along the pleat legs with scissors or any other sharp tool. Do the same for the front bodice pleats. Fold according to the marked direction. As you can see, the waist seam edge has become a little uneven because of the alterations. This means to smooth out. Fold the seam allowance under. Fold the pleats on the front bodice piece. Then transfer the waist seam line to the blank side of the back bodice piece. The easiest way to do it is to use glass or tracing paper. After you've transferred the waist seam edge to the blank side, fold the seam allowance under and pin to join the front and back bodice pieces along the side seam. Now redraw the waist seam edge with a smooth line to get rid of all the broken lines and mismatches. Place the French curve ruler so that it hits as many sections of the drawn line as possible. Redraw the waist seam edge. Add a 1 cm seam allowance. Fix the line if necessary and cut off the excess. Remove the pins. Cut along the new side seam edge. Transfer all the changes from the left front bodice piece to the right front bodice piece. The bodice pieces are adjusted. Proceed to alter the skirt pieces. We have reduced the bodice piece by 3 cm, and now we need to take in the side seam of the skirt by the same amount. Measure 3 cm towards the inside of the piece. Add a 1 cm seam allowance. Do the same for the front skirt piece. Cut off the excess, join the skirt pieces along the side seam, and verify the integrity of the waist seam edge. These adjustments will help you make the pattern pieces smaller at the waist. If you need to make them larger instead, follow the same rules and increase the area. Maintain the distance between the center edge and the first pleat. Reduce the pleat intake while maintaining the distance between the pleats. This will guarantee the bodice will match the skirt. The pleat will coincide with the dart. The same applies to the front bodice piece. Maintain the distance between the center front line and the first pleat. Reduce the pleat intake and maintain the distance between the pleats. When dealing with this case, we have reduced the pattern pieces evenly at the pleats and side seams. However, the wearer might happen to have a full seat, which will require increasing the dart intake. How do you make the pleat match the dart? We are going to increase the intake by 1 centimeter. Therefore, we need to spread it by 5 millimeters on each side. Draw the new dart legs. The dart has become 1 centimeter wider. It has also shifted towards the center edge by 5 millimeters. Therefore, we need to distribute the amount added to the dart between the pleats and move the first pleat towards the center edge accordingly. Here's the first pleat. You may maintain the distance between the pleats. In this case, increase the second pleat towards the right. Here's the result. That's how you increase the dart intake and distribute the added width between the pleats. If you need to make alterations at the waist and hips, make sure to verify them by sewing a toile. If you have any questions, please contact your sewing mentor.